Welcome back to Animal Encounters. Today, we are covering 7 safari encounters across 3 continents. Moments where a single reckless decision, sometimes less than 30 seconds in the making, turned a bucket list wildlife experience into something no one walked away from unchanged. From a leopard hidden in a Ugandan forest corridor to a Nile crocodile taking a woman off a South African riverbank she had stood on the day before without a scratch. But first, we start in northern India, at a tiger reserve, where a Bengal tiger sits low in the brush 60 feet from a safari vehicle, and a woman steps off the back of it. On October 14th, 2016, at a tiger reserve in the Corbett region of Uttarakhand, northern India, a safari group of 9 tourists had been riding through the forest buffer zone for roughly 2 hours in an open-sided canter vehicle. The dry season had pushed prey animals toward the road corridors, and with them, the predators that followed. The reserve's guides had been logging tiger sightings along the eastern trails nearly every single day that week. The forest was active in a way that should have registered as meaningful. For most of the group, it registered as exciting. Priya Dingle, 34 years old, was a travel content creator from Pune with a sponsored documentation series running across her social media platforms. She had built her brand on immersive, close-contact wildlife content and had arrived at the reserve with a clear agenda: frame the tiger as close as the vehicle allowed. She had spent most of the 2-hour morning ride positioned at the outer edge of the canter, camera extended, logging every flicker of movement in the undergrowth. The guide had given the group clear instructions before departure in Hindi and in English that exiting the vehicle at any point for any reason was strictly prohibited. The instruction was standard and non-negotiable. It had been given twice. The canter stopped at a designated viewing point along the forest road when a Bengal tiger became partially visible approximately 60 feet into the tree line, low in the dry brush. The tiger had not moved. It was settled into the cover at an angle that faced the vehicle. Most passengers reached for cameras. Priya repositioned herself toward the rear of the canter, crouching at the frame's outer edge to extend her camera angle below the vehicle's railing. The guide was stationed at the front, pointing the sighting out to other passengers with his back to the rear of the group. That positioning would matter. I think this is the part that people fully don't understand about these animals. That tiger was not posing. It was not reacting to the noise of the tourists with cameras. It was watching, assessing. That is a completely different thing from curiosity. And most of the people in that canter had no framework to read the difference. According to the accounts of multiple passengers reviewed during the investigation, Priya stepped down from the rear step of the canter onto the road surface to improve her shooting angle. She was on the road for under a minute. Bengal tigers are among the largest big cats on Earth, with adults in the Corbett region weighing between 350 and 500 pounds. They hunt through concealment, relying on explosive bursts of speed that can cover 60 feet in under 3 seconds. A tiger lying low, perfectly still, and focused on a lone person is often in a pre-charge position. It does not circle, roar, or give a warning. The attack begins suddenly, leaving almost no time to react. The tiger crossed the clearing before most passengers had processed what they were seeing. Passengers at the rear of the canter registered the movement a fraction of a second before contact. The animal struck Priya from behind with full momentum, driving her to the ground. The force of that initial impact alone caused severe trauma to her upper back and shoulder region. The tiger gripped her by the shoulder and neck area and pulled her off the road surface and into the brush line. The guide reacted immediately, shouting, using the vehicle horn, radioing for assistance, but the entire sequence, from the moment the tiger left cover to the moment Priya disappeared into the tree line, lasted only a few seconds. No physical intervention was possible in that window. Reserve response teams and Forest Department personnel arrived approximately 25 minutes later. Priya Dingle was located 40 yards inside the tree line from where she had been standing. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation determined that the victim had exited the vehicle in direct violation of explicit safety instructions and that the animal had acted within documented wild predator behavior parameters. The tiger was not culled. The safari operator cooperated fully with the inquiry. The guide's conduct was reviewed and found compliant with reserve protocol at every point. 40 yards inside the tree line, the guide did everything correctly. The warning had been given. He was right there, and she was 40 yards into that forest before anyone could physically respond. That one step off the vehicle, that is the entire story. Everything that followed was already in motion the moment her foot hit the road. While northern India had taken Priya Dingle in seconds, the forests of western Uganda would soon show how another ambush predator could remain perfectly still until the final moment, turning just a few extra steps into a fatal mistake. On March 7th, 2015, along the edge of a riverine forest corridor in western Uganda, a small guided photography walk had been underway since early morning. morning. The trail followed the boundary between open grassland and a dense strip of forest vegetation running along a seasonal stream channel, the kind of transitional habitat that concentrates large predators in Uganda's western safari regions. The local operator running the excursion had logged leopard activity along that specific corridor on multiple occasions across the preceding 3 weeks. It was, in part, why the route had been selected. Renata Wojciech, 41 years old, was a wildlife photographer from Prague, commissioned by a European nature publication to document East African forest ecosystems. She had field experience in Botswana and Kenya and had built a professional reputation on close-range wildlife frames. She had joined a private 2-person walk with a licensed Ugandan guide, Waswa Nakibule, 33. It was the second morning of a 3-day forest corridor excursion. Renata had been direct about her goals for the trip. She needed frames that put the animal in its environment rather than photographed from a distance. Waswa had heard that kind of brief before. Approximately 40 minutes into the trail, Waswa stopped the group and held a closed fist, the halt signal. He had spotted a leopard resting in the fork of a large fig tree, roughly 50 feet into the vegetation to their left, partially screened by hanging branches. The animal was visible, but not fully exposed. Waswa signaled Renata to hold her position and keep her movements minimal. Renata raised her camera and assessed the frame. The hanging branches were cutting across the animal's body. She took 2 steps left along the trail to clear the obstruction. Waswa gave a flat palm signal stay. She took 2 more steps, now angling off the trail itself and into the fringe of the forest vegetation. Here's the thing about a resting leopard in a tree. The stillness looks like safety. The animal is above you. It appears settled, and every instinct trained by watching wildlife documentaries says that distance is the variable you control. What that instinct does not account for is that a leopard at 50 feet in a tree with a clear line of sight to something approaching is already in a position it does not need to improve. You are the one closing the gap. Leopards are powerful ambush predators found across sub-Saharan Africa and the Indian subcontinent, with documented fatal attacks on humans every year. Adult males weigh up to 200 pounds. They rely on cover, silence, and explosive speed rather than warning displays. A leopard hidden just 20 to 30 feet away is already within striking distance, and it can attack in less than a second. The leopard dropped from the fig fork and covered the ground between the tree and Renata's position almost immediately. Waswa shouted and moved toward the vegetation. The animal struck Renata from the front, driving her backward into the forest fringe. Waswa used a wooden staff to strike toward the animal repeatedly. The leopard released after several seconds and retreated into the vegetation. Waswa reached Renata within moments of the animal withdrawing. She had sustained severe injuries to her face, upper chest, and left shoulder region. Waswa applied direct pressure using clothing from his pack and activated an emergency radio to contact the operator's base camp. A vehicle reached the trail access point in approximately 50 minutes. Renata Wojciech lost consciousness during transport and did not recover. She was pronounced dead at a regional medical facility. The investigation confirmed leopard involvement based on wound characteristics, paw prints recovered at the scene, and Waswa's account. His conduct was reviewed and cleared. The investigation noted the victim had moved off the designated trail and into the forest fringe against the guide's explicit signal, reducing the distance to the animal to within the range at which a defensive response was likely. Waswa was close enough to fight back with a staff, yet he still could not stop the attack. The leopard moved faster than he could react. In dense forest, 20 feet can disappear in less than a second. While the forests of western Uganda had claimed Renata Wojciech after just a few extra steps, the dry lowveld of Zimbabwe would soon show that the most fatal distance on a walking safari is not always measured to the water. Sometimes it is measured from the group. On August 22nd, 2017, at a private game conservancy in the Midlands region of Zimbabwe, a guided walking safari had been operating since mid-morning. The conservancy covered over 40,000 acres of mixed woodland and open savanna, and maintained a lion population that had expanded significantly following a prey species reintroduction program completed 3 years prior. That expansion had changed the risk profile of the walking routes in ways that were not always obvious to visiting guests, particularly those who had completed walking safaris elsewhere and arrived with a baseline of familiarity they assumed transferred. Daveren Kessel, 56 years old, was a retired civil engineer from Amsterdam who had completed 2 walking safaris in Tanzania Uganda before this trip. He considered the walking format more engaging than vehicle-based touring and had selected the Conservancy specifically for its wildlife density. The group consisted of Kessel and 2 other guests, led by a licensed professional guide and an armed backup tracker. The final full day of a 3-day package. Kessel was comfortable out there. That comfort was something the guide had already had to manage twice that morning. The morning session had passed without incident. The guide called a rest break at a dry riverbed around midday. Before the break, he gave the group the standard protocol: remain together, no movement beyond the immediate rest area, no separating from the group for any reason. It was the same instruction he had given at the start of each morning session, and it was the same instruction he had issued individually to Kessel twice that morning after observing him drift ahead of the group to position for camera shots. The guide had corrected it both times. Kessel had complied both times. That is the pattern that gets to me. This was not a guest who had never been warned. The guide had corrected the exact same behavior individually twice in the same morning. And during the break, Kessel moved approximately 60 feet from the group along the riverbed embankment. African lions are apex predators found across sub-Saharan Africa. Adult females weigh between 260 and 310 pounds and perform most of the pride's hunting. They use dry riverbeds and embankments as hidden travel routes, launching fast ambushes from close range with speed and surprise. A lone person on foot faces far greater danger than a tightly grouped party with an armed guide. The group's numbers, the guide, and the firearm all discourage an attack. Remove those protections, and the risk changes dramatically. The guide and tracker heard movement in the brush, followed by a single shout from the direction of the embankment. They reached Kessel's position in approximately 2 minutes. A lioness estimated at around 280 pounds based on tracks, and the tracker's brief visual during response was standing over Kessel when they arrived. The tracker discharged a warning shot. The animal moved into the brush. The guide reached Kessel immediately and initiated emergency contact. Kessel had sustained severe injuries to his neck, upper back, and shoulder region. A vehicle was dispatched from the Conservancy's main camp. He lost consciousness before it reached them. Devorin Kessel was pronounced dead upon arrival at a regional medical facility approximately 2 hours later. The Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority reviewed the incident. The investigation noted the victim had separated from the group contrary to explicit and repeated guide instructions. The Conservancy's protocols were found adequate. The lioness was not pursued. 60 feet. He was 60 feet from the group in a conservancy with a documented growing lion population, and the guide had already individually corrected the same behavior twice that morning. 2 minutes was how long it took to cover 60 feet and get there. That is not enough time. It was never going to be enough time. While Zimbabwe's dry riverbed had claimed Devorin Kessel 60 feet from the group, the tented camps of central India would soon reveal what happens when wildlife activity is logged in a staff record and never makes it to the people sleeping 30 feet from the tree line. On June 3rd, 2014, at a small private safari camp operating within a wildlife buffer zone in Madhya Pradesh, central India, a group of 6 guests had retired for the evening following a full-day game drive. The camp consisted of canvas tents elevated on low wooden platforms, arranged in a loose line along the edge of a dry creek bed where teak and bamboo forest met the clearing. The creek had been dry for weeks. The site looked open and unremarkable. Nothing about it appeared to require additional caution. Arvind Choksi, 47 years old, was a textile manufacturer from Ahmedabad. He had organized the private weekend for a group of business associates and had used the same operator twice before. That history, the ease that comes with returning somewhere that has always been fine, was part of why no one questioned the camp's proximity to the forest edge. Arvind knew this operator. He had been comfortable here before. The familiarity was real, and it created a level of assumed safety that the conditions of that particular season did not support. 2 days before the group's arrival, camp staff had observed sloth bear tracks near the creek bed. The information had been logged, but had not been passed to incoming guests. Drought conditions that season had pushed sloth bears out of their usual hill forest habitat into lower creek valleys in search of water, and the camp's position along that dry corridor placed it directly in the path of that movement. No night guard had been stationed between the tent line and the forest edge. Tracks. They had tracks 2 days before. Somebody logged it, and then somebody decided that the incoming guests did not need to know. That is the decision that shapes everything that follows. Not a dramatic failure, a quiet one. Sloth bears are native to the Indian subcontinent and cause more documented human fatalities and serious injuries in India than any other bear species. Adults weigh between 130 and 310 pounds. Despite their name, they are fast and unpredictable, especially during sudden close encounters. Their attacks are usually defensive, targeting the face and upper body with powerful curved claws, causing severe injuries within seconds. At some point after midnight, a sloth bear entered the camp perimeter along the creek bed. Based on scene evidence and the account of the guest in the neighboring tent who reported hearing movement outside, followed by a brief and sudden commotion, the bear encountered Arvind at or near the base of his tent platform. Steps. Whether he had stepped outside or whether the bear reached the platform's edge cannot be confirmed. The encounter lasted a short time. The bear returned to the brush before camp staff responded. Staff found Arvind at the base of the platform steps. He was unconscious and had sustained severe injuries to his face, head, and upper body consistent with a sloth bear attack. Emergency transport from the remote location required over 3 hours. Arvind Choksi was pronounced dead at a district hospital in the early morning hours. The investigation found the camp had failed to communicate known wildlife activity to guests and had not implemented adequate nighttime perimeter protocols for the buffer zone area. The operator's license was suspended pending a full review. The danger was never invisible. It was documented in the logbook. The real question is why that information never reached the people sleeping in those tents who needed it most. While Madhya Pradesh had taken Arvind Choksi at a camp that kept its own warning to itself, the floodplain channels of Botswana's Okavango would soon show how even a correctly executing guide can lose someone in the space of a single forward lean. On November 18th, 2016, in the northern channel system of the Okavango Delta in Botswana, a Mokoro excursion had been underway since mid-morning. The narrow papyrus corridors opened into wider lagoon crossings, and the early arrival of the wet season had brought elephant herds into the floodplain channels as they moved between the delta's scattered islands. It was the kind of morning the Okavango is known for: still water, dense vegetation pressing in from both sides, and large animals moving through it as though the boats were simply part of the landscape. Solene Muye, 38 years old, was a Kenyan-born conservation journalist based in Nairobi. She was documenting a community-based ecotourism initiative in the Delta and had joined a 2-day Mokoro excursion with a local guide, Puso Setlabi, 31. Puso had grown up on the Delta and had been pulling Mokoros professionally for 8 years. He knew those channels well, the currents, the animal patterns, which bends to approach slowly and which ones to avoid entirely. He was not operating without experience. The pair had stopped the Mokoro to observe a herd of approximately 20 elephants crossing a shallow channel roughly 120 feet ahead. At least 3 calves were visible moving with the group. Solene had been photographing steadily from the stationary vessel. One adult cow at the herd's near edge had turned to face the canoe. Puso had already begun moving the Mokoro backward, a slow, quiet reverse, using the pole against the channel bottom. The correct response. The distance between the canoe and the herd was increasing. The situation was being managed. Solene leaned forward from the front of the Mokoro with her camera to capture a frame of the cow as the boat moved backward. The shift in weight caused the bow to dip and rock visibly toward the water. That movement, that single physical shift at the front of a canoe in retreat, is the thing that changed everything. Up to that point, the withdrawal was working. African elephants are the largest land animals on Earth. Adult females weigh between 6,000 and 8,000 pounds and stand about 9 feet tall at the shoulder. Mothers fiercely protect their calves and may respond to danger with either a mock charge or a full charge. From a canoe only 40 feet away, it is almost impossible to tell the difference until the elephant either stops or makes contact. The cow charged. Puso drove the pole into the channel bottom and tried to turn the vessel. The elephant entered the water within seconds and reached the Mokoro almost immediately. The canoe capsized on impact. Puso pulled himself onto a papyrus bank. Solene surfaced in open water between the elephant and the far bank. Based on the injuries recovered and Puso's account from the bank, the elephant made direct contact with Solene in the water before returning toward the herd. Puso reached her and pulled her onto the papyrus bank. He used a satellite communicator to request emergency assistance. A response vessel reached the location approximately 1 hour, and 10 minutes later, Solene Mbuye was pronounced dead on site. The investigation concluded that proximity to a calf-containing herd, combined with the sudden forward shift of weight at the bow, had triggered a defensive charge from the cow. Puso's guiding license was reviewed and retained. Investigators determined he had been correctly executing a retreat at the moment of the incident, and that the movement which preceded the charge had originated from the passenger passenger, not from any action on his part. Puso did everything right and safely retreated after seeing the elephant. But one small movement at the wrong moment changed everything. Sometimes, even when you make the right decisions, the margin for error is incredibly small. While the Okavango's floodplains had taken Solene Mbuye in a channel she was already retreating from, the open ridge of a Tanzanian tented camp would soon reveal that the perimeter between a guest tent and the surrounding bush is only as solid as the protocol enforcing it, and that protocol had been quietly eroding for 5 nights. On July 9th, 2020, at a tented safari camp positioned on a ridgeline in Tanzania's northern Serengeti corridor, the final evening of a 6-night photography trip had ended quietly at the communal fire. The camp consisted of 12 canvas tents arranged in a loose arc along the ridge, with open views across the grassland falling away on 3 sides. A communal dining and fire area sat at the center of the arc. Camp protocol was explicit and had been stated at check-in after dark. All guest movement between tents and the communal area required a staff escort. No guest was to move through the camp perimeter alone after nightfall. Ferran Luis Moya, 42 years old, had been present for that briefing. Ferran was a commercial photographer from Barcelona who had planned this Tanzania trip for over 2 years as the foundation of a long-exposure nighttime photography project. He had been staying up past midnight throughout the trip to shoot star trails and wide landscape frames from outside the tent line. On the first 2 evenings, a staff member had remained nearby while he worked. By the 4th night, the staff member had fallen asleep during the session, and Ferran had continued working alone. According to staff accounts, this had not been reported. By the 6th and final night, the arrangement had fully normalized. He went out after the fire, set up his tripod, and worked. The camp had been documenting spotted hyena activity on and around the ridge for several weeks. A clan had been moving through the area nightly, drawn by a food waste disposal point located roughly 300 feet from the tent line. Guests had been verbally warned about this during check-in. Ferran had heard it. What that warning likely communicated and what it actually represented in terms of nightly animal movement through that exact ridgeline were not the same thing. Warnings about hyenas near camps can sound like general advice, but the real danger is more specific. These animals may have walked through the same camp every night for weeks without fear. To them, the camp was familiar. Ferran was the only unfamiliar presence, making him stand out as a vulnerable target. On the final night, Ferran set up his tripod approximately 40 feet beyond the tent line on the open ridge, in full darkness, after midnight, alone. Spotted hyenas are powerful social predators found across sub-Saharan Africa and are responsible for documented fatal attacks on humans every year, especially near camps and settlements. Adults weigh between 80 and 190 pounds and can reach speeds of 37 miles per hour. Hyenas living around camps often lose their fear of people. At night, a lone person beyond the firelight may appear to them as an easy and vulnerable target. Based on scene reconstruction by investigators, the attack occurred on the open ridge. Ferran's tripod was found overturned approximately 45 feet from the nearest tent. Camp staff heard sounds from the ridge and responded within several minutes, using flashlights and noise to drive the animals back. 2 spotted hyenas were observed moving into the grass as staff arrived. Ferran was found a short distance from his equipment. He was unresponsive when staff reached him. Emergency evacuation required a 2-hour road transfer to the nearest medical facility. Ferran Luis Moya was pronounced dead during transport. The investigation found that he had been operating outside the camp perimeter alone at night in an area with weeks of documented hyena activity, and that the camp's after-dark escort protocol had not been enforced with sufficient consistency across the duration of the stay. The operator was cited for inadequate guest safety enforcement. For 5 nights, he walked alone without trouble. Each safe trip made the next feel normal. By the 6th night, nothing seemed different. That is how danger often builds, slowly, not all at once. While Tanzania's ridge had taken Ferran Luis Moya 45 feet from safety, the river crossings of South Africa's Limpopo Lowveld would reveal how a decision that ended perfectly one afternoon can become the last decision made the next morning. On February 26th, 2018, at a shallow vehicle ford along a river in the Lowveld of Limpopo Province, South Africa, a self-drive safari group had paused at a crossing used to access a private concession bordering a national reserve. The ford was marked with a depth indicator and a posted wildlife caution notice. The river ran approximately 30 feet wide at the crossing point and showed roughly knee-height water on the gauge. Upstream rain the previous night had raised the level slightly, but from the bank, the ford looked exactly as it had the day before. Clear, shallow, manageable. Geraldine Auerkirk, 51 years old, was a retired school administrator from Pretoria making the trip with her husband, Willem, 54, and a family friend in a rented four-wheel drive vehicle. The group had spent 3 days on the Lowveld and had completed this exact crossing the previous afternoon without incident. During that crossing, Geraldine had stepped out on the far bank to photograph the vehicle mid-ford and had come away with a frame she had been happy with. That photograph and the fact that it had worked without any problem would shape exactly what she did the following morning. On the second crossing, she decided to replicate the shot, this time from the near bank before the vehicle entered the water so she could photograph it coming toward her through the ford. As the family friend later described to investigators, the plan was a brief photo stop. She would stand at the bank margin, get the shot, and get back in. She walked approximately 8 feet from the vehicle along the rocky bank edge while Willem drove into the water. The water looked calm and the riverbank seemed safe. Nothing revealed the danger below. That is what makes a Nile crocodile so deadly. There is no warning at all until the moment it attacks. Nile crocodiles are Africa's largest freshwater predators, often growing 12 to 16 feet long and weighing between 500 and 1,100 pounds. They wait completely hidden beneath the water near rocky banks, shallow edges, and river crossings where animals and people approach. After early rains, more gather in these spots. They give no warning. The first sign of danger is the strike itself, when the crocodile is already attacking. The crocodile struck from the water's edge. Willem was mid-river in the vehicle and did not see it. The family friend, seated in the passenger window, registered the movement but had no time to respond. Geraldine was pulled directly into the water from the bank margin. The vehicle reached the far bank and both men immediately moved downstream to search. They could not locate her. The animal did not surface within their view again. Emergency services were contacted and arrived at the crossing approximately 90 minutes later. A wildlife response team swept the river downstream that afternoon. Geraldine Auwerkirk was recovered a short distance downstream later that day. The investigation confirmed Nile crocodile involvement based on physical evidence and the account of the family friend. Authorities reviewed the caution notice posted at the ford and found it adequate for its purpose. The investigation noted that the victim had positioned herself on a rocky bank margin at an active Lowveld river crossing without any assessment of what the water's edge represented in that environment. The first safe visit made the second feel harmless. She believed nothing would happen because it never had before. The river looked unchanged, but one thing was different. Hidden beneath the same calm water, a crocodile was already waiting.